Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I'm absolutely thrilled that you are here. We're getting found more and more places, but generally you can find the Billy Dees Podcast pretty much anywhere podcasts are found, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Stitcher, on down the line. With me on the studio line is Penny.
Hello.
Hello, Penny. Penny, this is, you don't hear this profession talked about too much, and that's one of the reasons why she is here. I do have experience with it. Penny is a hospice nurse who shares her experiences to normalize death and dying. And that's interesting. We're going to talk about that. She also describes herself as the CEO of sass. So I guess I better watch out. I've had a lot of experience with that too. So where are you at, Penny? What part of the world do you originate from?
Well, I'm in Washington State. I pretty much originated in Washington State, but my dad was military and my ex-husband was military. So I've moved around and lived in many places in the country, but Washington has mostly been my home.
Yeah, I hear that state coming up quite often because of seems like there's a lot of job opportunities coming out there, and when I consider Washington State, I mean I always think of Seattle and those places, but I guess there's a lot going on out there, so that's great. When you're not doing this, and I will call it incredible work. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the work that you do in hospice care. It's something that a lot of people don't understand. It's hard work. So what do you do to unwind? What's for fun?
Well, we have a cabin in Eastern Washington that's off the grid, and we go there fairly often and pretend to be on Little House on the Prairie. And I spend a lot of time making TikToks, videos,
Yes.
for social media regarding hospice and being sassy.
Yes, that's how I came into contact with you. It was during TikTok. I have not done that much with it between my quote unquote day job and this here. It's a good part of what I do is social media marketing, and it's just like anything else. I maintain the Facebook and the Twitter, and it's hard to juggle a dozen of them. But starting in 2021, I'm of the mind that I might spend a little bit more time on it and back away from things like Instagram, which it doesn't seem to me like it has the traffic that it once did. Mm-hmm. And because I've had a number of people from TikTok on the program here over the last 12 months. And it seems like there's some very engaging people. I think to be successful on that platform, you have to have some skill at communicating, even if it's just dancing or whatever. That's a skill. You entertain people. Mm-hmm. And you don't only get that from Instagram and places like that. So were you drawn to the medical field at an early age?
No, I wasn't actually. I bounced around and did many jobs, and then got married and was a stay-at-home homeschooling mom. And my husband and I decided that we needed to be splitting up, getting a divorce, and I didn't have any career to fall back on. And so I decided to go to nursing school when I was 40 years old, and started off being an LPN, licensed practical nurse, and went into hospice almost immediately because I was really drawn to it, and continued my education until I got my bachelor's in nursing, which is what I have now, bachelor's in nursing, and I'm certified in hospice and palliative care.
Yeah. The obvious question would be what steered you towards hospice, because that's not something that would jump out at me as, oh, this is what I want to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, my ex-husband's stepmother had cancer, and she went into a hospice inpatient unit and was there for a little while and then went home with hospice. And I was really impressed with the nurses. At that time, I wasn't even entertaining the idea of going to nursing school. But when I decided to become a nurse, I knew that I wanted to do something that was going to be meaningful and helpful to people. And it was either going to be that or work in a nursing home. During that time, there was a lot of reports of elder abuse going on in nursing homes. And I wanted to be in a field where you really get to make a difference for people. Once I became a nurse, my first experience in nursing was in a clinic, and you deal with a lot of drug seekers and people who aren't really sick. And so when you go into hospice, it's very genuine. You're dealing with people who really are very sick, and it's very much more meaningful and very rewarding.
Yeah, I hear the two terms palliative and hospice care.
Mm-hmm.
I probably couldn't clearly define them myself, and I'm sure a lot of people listening can. What are the two functions of those things?
So both are meant to address symptom management. The difference between palliative and hospice is that for hospice, you need to have a terminal diagnosis with a life expectancy of 6 months or less. And for palliative, you do not need to have a terminal diagnosis. You could be just chronically ill, and or you could have a terminal diagnosis, and you're still continuing to seek treatment. When you're on hospice, you are no longer continuing to seek treatment for your illness. So that's kind of the main difference. So palliative is kind of going on two tracks. It's going on trying to continue to treat the disease and also manage symptoms and provide a higher level of comfort-focused care, whereas hospice is foregoing the treatment and really focusing more on comfort-focused care and end-of-life goals. So I always kind of consider palliative care as kind of a stepping stone to hospice.
Yeah. My next question would be in regard to hospice, and there seems to be a stigma around it. My mother died, well, it's going on 3 years now, and she was approaching 90, and she just became overall very weak. I guess that's the best way to describe it. Things were just shutting down. Whether it be heart function, although her heart kind of stayed strong, that's good. That's kind of one of the things that made her linger as long as she did. But other functions in her system were just shutting down. And there was really no way to, I guess, treat any one of those things. And the reason I'm bringing this up was somebody said something to me at the funeral home that really ticked me off. Was that I had given up on mom by putting her into hospice, and that really irritated me because, without going into a lot of details about this person did not work. She was married to a very successful husband. Her kids were grown, and when her mother got older, she didn't hesitate at all to put her in a nursing home, which she was there for 10 years. Okay. And she very easily could have taken care of her mother if she really wanted to, but I'm the one that gave up on mom because I put her in hospice. You got to keep in mind that she was not functional at all. She couldn't take care of herself. She couldn't sit up, let alone stand up. Her consciousness was very limited. Her knowing what was going on around her. So we had hospice come to the house, and I got to take this moment to give full credit to my wife, because taking care of my mother, we took care of her for a while when she was still, relatively functional, could watch TV and stuff. But in that whole time, but in particular with her dying wishes, which was to stay at home, my wife really was a saint. I mean, we had her set up in the living room, and we slept on the couch together. So we were right there with my mom. So if she did die, she didn't die alone. And I can't give enough props to my wife during this time. However, that remark at the nursing home really hit me there. I'm a nice guy generally, but I'll tell you what, funeral home or not, I almost opened my mouth. So have you encountered this, that hospice is essentially a death sentence, which I
Yes.
know that, yes, which I
Mhm.
know that isn't true.
Mhm.
And it's, to me, it's not giving up. We're going to get into how we treat death in this country, in this society, in this culture in a little bit, but I guess that would be the stigma, that it's a death sentence. How would you react to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's several parts to that. There's the giving up, and we like to say that we don't want people to think that they're giving up hope.
Hmm.
We are wanting them to reframe what hope looks like. That you are now hoping to be able to provide somebody with comfort at the end of their life, to make sure that they're not in pain, to make sure that they are able to do the things that they want to do. Many times, somebody who is very ill is going to multiple doctor appointments. They're spending their time in the hospital. They're, and we want to try to help them to have time to do the things that are more important to them, rather than these constant
Yeah.
hospitalizations and going for testing and all of the things. So we like to say that we're trying to change what hope looks like. And then we also get if you're going on hospice, you're going to, they're going to give morphine until the person dies. That's what they do. They're going to starve them to death, those types of things. And really, I do encounter that on my TikTok with comments, and I am constantly, kind of battling that, if you will, by putting videos out to try to dispel the rumor and myth about hospice. And I'm encouraged, because even though I still have those people who come on and say those things, I also have 135,000 followers who believe in hospice and appreciate the education about death and dying. So I'm encouraged that we're moving in the right direction. People
Yeah.
really want to hear about it more, and that's encouraging to me. But that is really one of the primary focuses that I have, is dispelling the rumor around hospice.
Yeah. We, in the beginning of our program, we talked about I guess your one of your goals about normalizing death, and I do. That intrigues me, because I'm sure in our culture, the history of religion, and other things, and I'm not saying anything negative about any of those things, but we never second guess birth. We never second guess infancy. We never second guess adolescence. We never second guess adulthood on down the line, that these are all different stages of life. And for some reason, when you get to the death part, you got to fight that.
Mhm.
Death comes like a thief in the night. The Grim Reaper is coming. And a lot of these superstitions from Europe, and a lot of other things from our heritage as a country, are here regarding death. It's a spooky thing. We don't want it in the house. I don't want somebody to die in my
Mhm.
house. And so normalizing death. Talk about that a little bit for us.
Well, first of all, the main reason why I want to normalize death, and really more specifically the dying process, is because people, if they don't know what to expect when somebody is going through the changes that are going to lead to their eventual death, it can be really terrifying. Knowledge is power. And so, by educating around the things that we see at the end of life, and we see very similar signs in people who are dying, there are really specific signs and symptoms that people will have as they approach the end of life. And if we normalize that, it becomes less of a fearful thing. And at the same time, it is making the subject of death less taboo. I think people are mostly afraid not of death, but of dying and what dying looks like.
Yeah.
There are people that are afraid of death. I was one that was absolutely mortified of death. It really used to keep me awake at night. I had
Yeah.
such anxiety around, and I wasn't raised with any religion, so I didn't have any kind of belief about what happens after we die. And so it was terrifying to me.
Yeah.
But having become a hospice nurse and seeing things that have led me to believe there's something more after we die, that has really kind of assuaged that fear and that anxiety in me. And then that's part of also what I am bringing to people is my experiences with seeing, people dying and going through this, and this belief that I have, take it or leave it. And I think that helps a lot also. But you're right. I mean, we normalize every aspect of life except for death. And none of us get out of here alive. And I
That's right.
used to say that to my patients and my families as well. None of us gets out of here alive. People are so surprised, especially when they're in their 90s and they're faced with death. They just can't believe that that's happening. So what did you think was going to happen?
Yeah. That's very true. I personally don't have a fear of death necessarily. I just don't want to suffer. When you consider, let's say, a plane crash, and this is going to sound really horrible, but it's like that first hill on a roller coaster, and then boom, it's over. Okay, I don't necessarily have a fear of that, but I have had people in my family over the years. I've had friends and their families have people just linger on and go an inch at a time, and they're absolutely miserable during that time. And that's kind of what my greatest fear would be. But that's my own personal thing. I'm sure there's other people who feel differently. Maybe their beliefs drive them. The next question would be around family members. And here again, I'm of the age where a lot of people that I've known have either died or they've had a lot of family members die. I'm down to just a few people left in my family. Everybody else is pretty much gone. So I've seen people, for example, encourage their parents, sit at the edge of the bed and cry and tell them, please don't go. You got to fight this and blah, blah, blah. And that's okay if what I would call there's a legitimate chance of recovery. Somebody who's in their 50s or 60s and they've had a bad heart attack and it's just a matter of getting through the crisis, getting through the bypass or getting the stent put in, and they very easily could live another 10 or 20 years. That's fine. But in the case of like somebody like my mother who was 90, whose organs were shutting down, that would have just tortured her. What would you say is the best way to, as a family member, support someone who is dying? And I'm sure that it depends a lot on their beliefs and all those other things, but to fight the urge to encourage them to live at all cost. And that's probably the biggest mistake that I have witnessed.
Right. Yeah. And we talk to families about the need to accept what is and let people go, that you can actually keep people here by not letting them go. And I've seen that happen. I've had a patient who was dying. I mean, she was, for all intents and purposes, she was dead. I was about to pronounce her. And because there was a daughter in the room that could not stop crying and let her go, the patient actually took a gasping breath just as I was about to pronounce her and lived for several more hours until that daughter could calm down.
Yeah.
So really, and again, it's about reframing hope and, trying to really focus on quality of time, quality together, and that it's exhausting for somebody to continue to try to fight something, and it becomes futile at some point. And again, it goes back to, how much time do you want to spend in the hospital at the end of your life, and, you mentioned lingering, and that's another thing that I have always felt strongly about addressing with families. Many times when they finally get to the point when they're okay with somebody dying and they've accepted it, they're ready for that person to go, and that person is lingering much longer than what would be expected. Families tend to really suffer from that. They believe that the person who's dying is suffering because they're lingering. And, I always have to point out to them that if the person is comfortable, we look at the face, are they relaxed? Do they look comfortable? Then lingering doesn't equal suffering for them.
Yeah.
But for the family, it can, because they're in this place of what we call anticipatory grief. They are waiting for someone to die, and that does not feel good.
Right.
It doesn't feel good when you're waiting for someone to die. So, I was always trying to make sure that people understand that lingering for the patient isn't suffering, but it's more challenging for the family.
Obviously, even funerals themselves. They say funerals are for the family; they're not really for the person that passed away.
Yeah, for sure.
I've heard you say in your videos that you mentioned that you don't necessarily encourage or discourage a given set of spiritual beliefs. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is just from watching your videos.
Mm-hmm.
However, there does seem to be a certain consistency, a certain amount of experiences that the dying person and sometimes the family members have in the final moments of life. And I've heard this before. In the past, I've explored the idea of what we call near-death experiences, where people have been in the emergency room, let's say, for example, and they're actually dead for a few moments. And there does seem to be some consistency in terms of what those people experience. And I've always found that intriguing. Now, it's not conclusive to me, but I do find it intriguing. Out-of-body experiences and things like that can be explained in other ways. Fighter pilots, deep sea divers, things like that have had them. But by the same token, some of the things that I have heard about death, where there seems to be a water in a lot of these experiences, where there's a loved one who has passed that's on the other side of the water, and there's a beckoning come across, those types of things. Those types of things are more intricate to explain, to me anyway, and why I find them intriguing, just from a lack of oxygen or something like that. So you mentioned that a lot of your experiences have changed your beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And what are some of the consistencies? What are some of the things that have put a sense of wonderment in you, let's say spiritually, with some of the enormous amount of deaths that you've been around, and the consistency that seems to happen in those moments?
Yeah. So, and I have been around a lot of death, having started my hospice career in inpatient hospice, where you have in your face death and dying on a day-to-day basis, and did that for 7 years. So I've literally seen hundreds of people die. And what I have seen is that people towards the end of life often they'll be reaching up, they'll be expressing that they are seeing their deceased loved ones or pets at the end of life. And it is convincing. I mean, you walk in the room and someone's telling you that their wife is right there. You almost feel for a minute like you're the crazy one because you can't see what's going on.
Yeah.
They are very convinced. And I've had people that say, it's just the chemicals, it's just the lack of oxygen. And I kind of, I reject that. And the reason why is because they're not saying, oh, there's a purple unicorn up there. Oh, there's a, whatever up there, a spotted leopard, or, it's consistent. Everybody is saying the same thing, that they see somebody that has died. And so for me, it just, it firmly seats this belief that there is something else. I've never heard anybody talk about water. That's interesting. I've never heard that before. It's just them being there. And I did ask a patient once who told me that he could see his wife if she was coming to get him. And he said, yes, she's coming, but not today. She's going to come tomorrow. And which she didn't. She came 2 days later.
Really?
And the caregiver said it was always like her to be late. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah.
Well, it was very consistent, right?
Yeah. And then I had my own experience after my father died too, where he came to me in the form of energy, and just my, learning about chemistry, and that nothing ever really completely disappears. It just changes its form. And, for me, that's, it's just comforting, and it's just something that I believe. And I don't ever say you have to believe this. You can believe what you want, but I do reject, that it's some kind of a chemical process, because I feel like we would see different, if you want to call them hallucinations, we call them visioning in hospice.
Yeah.
And I've never met a hospice clinician who did not think that what they were seeing was real. And we refer to it literally as visioning versus hallucinations, which is something completely different.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just say that when I researched the pieces that I did in the past, the water came up more specifically in near-death experiences, not necessarily people that were laying there dying. Excuse me. So, yeah, I mean, people who were brought in just after a motorcycle accident or whatever, a lot of them afterwards spoke about being beckoned by loved ones who had passed, and there was a stream or water that they had to cross. And the out of body experiences, I heard about an experiment. As far as I know, it didn't yield any results, but I heard about an experiment where they, in certain emergency rooms, in this one place where they were researching this, they put some pictures upside down. There was, like the operating area, and then there was the ceiling, the drop ceiling of some kind, and then there was oxygen pipes up there. And they put certain pictures upside down facing up. On the off chance that somebody had an out-of-body experience, if they came back and said, why is a picture of Elvis in your ceiling? Now, that would be very intriguing. That would have my attention. But as far as I know, that hasn't happened. I'll ask you. Well, let me. Asking somebody about their personal beliefs is kind of touchy. So let me go first. I'll go first. Strong faith, as it were, is a gift that I particularly do not have. And I don't like the term skeptic, because a skeptic actually has, in the common vernacular, has a spin that I don't like. It implies that I am going to deny your experience, that I am going to say that's not true. And that's not the case at all. It's just that in this situation in particular, it is very difficult for anybody. Einstein struggled with it, to be able to separate what they know to be true from what they want to be true, what comforts them. It's probably one of the hardest things in the world to do. I had a grandfather on my mom's side that was just the sweetest man in the world. And actually, both my grandparents. I don't know that there's a day that goes by that I don't recollect something or miss them. And nothing would make me happier than to be able to meet them again someday. And I don't necessarily believe that it won't happen. Okay. I would want it to be true. It gives me hope, the idea that it could happen, that there's also, that's the one thing that, in believing that you're going to greet loved ones again, that also says something about your own immortality, that you are going to live on as well, which here again feeds into what we want to be true. But I also can separate that, or at least I try to, from that's a personal truth. Anything you believe regarding religion or something like that is a personal truth. It doesn't translate so well into an objective truth. If we could design an experiment that was verifiable, that was repeatable, and had predictable results, that showed that some sort of spirituality was affecting the physical world, that name, if you did it, Penny, your name would dwarf Einstein. It would dwarf it would dwarf Copernicus. It would dwarf Hawking. Those names would become footnotes on the pages of history. It would probably be more significant than finding a life in outer space. And the fact of the matter is that just hasn't happened yet.
And it never will.
Okay. So
it never will.
Right. So you really have to accept the fact that you're intertwining hope into your belief. Okay. And that's not so hard to do. Some people will say, no, I know because of this, that, and the other thing. And the fact of the matter is that your personal truth. I respect it. I want it to be true myself. I had I won't necessarily go through I had a little incident after my grandfather's death that is very hard to explain. Okay. But here again, I can't duplicate it. I can't repeat it. I can't show it to you. So I can, however, have hope. And a lot of these things involving near death or dying experiences that these people have, And like you said, they're intricate visions. They are not abstract ones. And they have a consistency in terms of how these people behave. A lot of these people, my grandmother, she talked to my grandfather who was passed in her final moments, and she was otherwise lucid. I mean, she wasn't, thinking she was, in Palestine somewhere. She knew where she was, but she was still, having these things. So I hope that there is something to spirituality. I hope that there is, but I also, from a skeptical point of view, I also recognize that I might be wrong. What is, you say you've gone on a spiritual journey. You weren't necessarily raised with spirituality, but you have come to accept certain aspects of spirituality. Do you want to explain that a little bit?
Well, yes. Just as far as what happens after we die, my feeling about how our spirit lives on is in the form of energy. That somehow our essence, if you will, is released into the universe as energy. Beyond that, I don't know. And that's just my hope. Like you say, that's my hope. That's what I want to believe. That's what I choose to believe. It's not objective whatsoever, although it's based on some things that I've seen, throughout being a hospice nurse. But that's pretty much the extent of it. I'm not religious at all. I do believe that there's a power greater than ourselves. I have a very abstract view of that as well. I don't think of a guy with a white beard sitting up in the clouds pulling the strings. I will sometimes refer to what I think of as my higher power as God, although again, I don't have this vision of some kind of a deity that's out there. I think if there was a God that was controlling things, we'd have a lot less death of children by cancer and horrible things that go on. I refuse to believe that there's a good and there's an evil controller up there that's making things happen, like
sure.
Satan in charge of childhood cancer. So I really, I don't really think beyond just this feeling that there's something more, and that I don't know what that is, and that I just want to try to, live my life the best way that I can and accept what is. And I really don't, I feel like if there is a God or the higher power, however you want to look at it, that being or whatever would embrace everybody. And that's why I kind of reject the notion of religion, especially Christianity, because it's very one-sided. It's very, you got to do what I say you're going to do, or else you're going to go to hell. I also think that causes a lot of spiritual suffering for people, and I don't want to have to experience that myself. So.
Sure.
So I don't know if that gets to the answer what you're looking for.
I will speculate as well. And I want to tell the audience that I fully recognize that what I am about to say is nothing but speculation. I have no evidence of this whatsoever. But in the course of researching this over the years, and I get hot and cold on it, there are times I really get into it, and there's times I back away from it. But I do feel that there's a certain amount of evidence for, religion refers to it as the soul. Science refers to it as the will. I do feel that in my research and in my going through this information, I do feel that there is some sort of a biological energy that is generated by living things, especially complex human things. And I'm sure you've seen the experiments and stuff where they've taken a leaf and they've cut part of it away and they photograph it a certain way under a certain kind of light, and the outline of the leaf is still there with uh, with the missing part. And that tells me that there is something to life other than like a vein. You can feel a vein, you can feel an artery. Now there might be something to that life in the form of some sort of an energy, some sort of a biological energy. And by the way, on this subject here too, and this feeds into my speculation, certain types of communication that are nonverbal are certainly present in other animals. We can observe the way that they seem to know what the other one's doing when they're hunting and stuff. I believe that ability, I know it sometimes gets exaggerated in terms of ESP and movies and things like that, but I think that ability is there, but we've lost it through the development of speech. We don't rely on it anymore. So I believe that there is a will, a constitution that may be present in living things, as you say, and how long it exists after death, I don't know. But here again, with sudden death in particular, family members experiencing bizarre things around the house, that is something that is here again consistent enough that it's worth some attention. So here again, that's pure speculation on my part. I don't have any evidence to back that up, but I just find it. I think you and I are on the same page there, that there could be something there, and we just haven't been able to put our finger on it yet. Go ahead.
When you said that about the leaf, the
Yes.
photographing of the leaf, what just immediately brought to my mind was I was doing a TikTok live yesterday, and this actually came up in there. But when a person has a body part that's amputated, and they have what we call as phantom pain,
yes,
where they actually can still continue to feel pain in that limb, even though the limb is long gone, and that we actually medicate for that. We will treat that with medication. So that's kind of another example of what you're talking about.
It's interesting. Like I said, science and everything else, the will, what we might call the will or the soul, is just a very hard thing to define, and I just don't know that we've done it yet. Very delicate subject here, but I'll go ahead and ask. I heard you mention in your state, I believe, there is what's called the right to die.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and here we live in this past year, 2020. We had a lot of people marching up and down the streets proclaiming, "You're not going to tell me how to live my life. No one's going to tell me what to do. The government's not going to tell me what to do, blah, blah, blah. I live my life the way I want to live my life," and on down the line. But for some reason, we readily take the notion that somebody is going to tell you how to die. And here again, religion, this idea that it's a sin, a suicide, and so on. This is a horrible analogy, but with what happened on 9/11, when you had people jumping out of the Twin Towers, and a lot of that was driven by heat. I don't know if you've ever been around extreme heat, but there's an instinct in your body that just says, get out of there, and you'll jump through anything, including glass, to get out. But to make the remark that those people, quote unquote, died by suicide, that they somehow just gave up on life, and all these other things. First of all, it's a slap towards suicide because that's more complicated. I work in a related mental health field, and I can tell you suicide is very much misunderstood by the general public.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in that mindset, it's an illness and you need help.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, the idea that people just willfully decided, you know what, I think I've had enough. That isn't what happened. What they chose to do was choose how they were going to die. Death was certain. And rather than burn alive, which has got to be one of the worst ways to go, they chose to jump. And you have that situation, in my opinion, when you have someone there's no hope. And of course, there has to be parameters for this because I know it could be abused. Mm-hmm. But there has to be, when a doctor and however this is set up mandates that this person is beyond hope, and while they still can say goodbye to their family in some sort of a lucid state, and while they can hold their hand and get comforted by that, rather than let themselves degrade into, some sort of a vegetative state or some sort of a painful semi-conscious state, they choose to hasten the death, medically. To me, that's choosing how you will die. That's not dying by suicide. That's my
Agreed.
opinion. Okay, so I'll let you speak about that.
Yeah, yeah, it's not suicide. And in fact, and somebody asked me this the other day on one of my TikToks, and I actually did a video about this because they were wondering if a person exercises their right to death with dignity, will insurance still pay life insurance because it's suicide? And it is not. We do not consider it suicide. The law is literally called death with dignity. People like to refer to it as physician-assisted suicide. Some Catholic organizations want to call it that because of their own bias.
Yeah.
But when a person exercises their right to death with dignity, the terminal or the cause of death is their terminal diagnosis, and the manner of their death is natural death. It is not suicide. It's not documented as a suicide because it is not considered a suicide exactly for the reasons that you're saying. Those people that were on the tower were burning up. They were going to die. Death was inevitable. They only chose to die on their own terms. And it's the same for people who want to exercise their right to death with dignity. And to be honest, I have never met a hospice clinician who was against the death with dignity law.
Yeah.
We know in hospice that there are times when there are fates worse than death, and we do our best to keep people from suffering, but sometimes we end up using palliative sedation, which is putting a person on an infusion that will permanently sedate them until their death. And to me, there's not a whole lot of difference there.
Yeah.
The only difference is that, we're calling it palliative sedation and we're sedating them and then they're going to die, but there's not a whole lot of difference. I'm absolutely 100% for death with dignity laws, and I wish it was a federal law, not just a state law, because some people have had to leave their home and go to another state in order to exercise their right to die on their own terms.
Yeah. Well, I'm with you there. And I'm not going to get political, but we hear all this stuff about, you're right to this and you're right to that, but somehow you don't get the same compassion that a sick horse gets in the end. So,
well, and I think comes down to, without getting too political too, but it comes down to like there's supposed to be a separation between church and state, but I think there's a very gray area in there
it's very big.
that people go into a lot, and that drives a lot of our politics and our laws, unfortunately.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I don't only throw into that. I've made sort of an odd observation in doing digital media and everything. I've gotten contact with people in Europe and specifically in the United Kingdom, where there is not an official separation of church and state. The Queen is actually, the head of the Church of England, but they don't have these issues like we do. For some reason, you would think it would be the opposite. But everything that they do over there does not require a reference to the Bible. It doesn't, when a prime minister gets elected in England, they don't talk about that this is what God wanted. You don't hear those things over there like you do here. So anyway, interesting. There are, here again, there's a lot of people out there who, for whatever reason, whether it be aging family members or somebody who's sick, and they're just getting their feet wet with this information. What online resources would you recommend for people who want to learn more about hospice?
So I am always referring people to the Medicare Compare website. It's a medicare.gov. They changed their address recently, but if you Google, you can do Compare Hospice and get to the link for that. Medicare Hospice really kind of dictates how most hospices are run. Well, for sure, all all Medicare certified hospice. And I always recommend people to go to Medicare certified hospice because they have to follow certain rules and regulations, some of which include the hospice clinicians are not allowed to proselytize to patients because they are vulnerable, and we don't want people going in there and trying to save them at the end. And there are different levels of care, and there's just a lot of rules that people have to follow if they're a Medicare certified hospice. And if you go to the Compare website, you can put in your zip code and it will bring up all the hospice agencies in your area. And then you can look at their quality scores. And there's not a lot yet, but Medicare is moving towards, putting more of the hospice quality scores on their Compare website so that people can see, how they rank in choosing what they want. And so Medicare really provides a lot of information about hospice. And that's the main resource, but also the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, the NHPCO, also has quite a bit of information on there as far as hospice.
Okay. A lot of people may not be familiar with TikTok. It is an app that essentially records in 15-second or 60-second intervals. You can pre-record your interview or your video and upload it. You are on TikTok, and you've tackled some pretty tough subjects on TikTok. And I give you a lot of credit for that. And I noticed, what you said about the CEO of sass. There's been a few people give you a hard time, but you give it right back.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I don't want to do it.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. You got to keep in mind that the ding dongs, and I've had them. I don't hear again. I haven't so much on TikTok because I haven't done a lot with it. But over the years, I've gotten a lot of grief from people over things I've said, doing other things. And the fact of the matter is these people drive your analytics just as much as people who just watch and stay silent. As a matter of fact, more.
Oh yeah.
So yeah. So.
I let them go sometimes. I definitely let them go in there. And
in my experience, my social media home is probably Twitter. I've had a few people come at me for some things over the years, and my policy is just not to engage because they're never going to concede, no matter how well thought out your argument is. So, but what I was getting at is you have some fantastic content on there. What is your screen name on TikTok? How can people find you on TikTok?
So I'm nurse_Penny on TikTok, and on Instagram, I'm Penny_the_nurse. And there's links in my bios to either one. So if you find one, you can find the other, but somebody had the nerve to take Nurse Penny on Instagram. So I'll stuck with Penny the Nurse, but
Penny the Nurse.
Yeah, but nurse_Penny on TikTok.
That's fantastic. What message of hope and encouragement would you have for anyone who knows that this is on the horizon for either them themselves or their family members?
I would encourage people to really take advantage of hospice and to not be afraid of enrolling in hospice when the time comes. It's such a fantastic service that it really enables people to have closure at the end of life. It supports the family, not only during the time that the patient is on service and dying, but for up to a year after the patient has died. We provide grief support services. That's a Medicare rule. And we actually, many hospices will provide grief support services to someone who has lost somebody within the last year, regardless of whether or not they were on hospice. So, I really hope that more people will start looking at hospice in a different way and understanding that we really just want to, we really care about making the end of life experience the best that it can possibly be in light of the situation. Yes, it's sad, but it's going to happen to all of us. None of us are going to get out of here alive, like I said.
Yeah.
And to be able to provide support at the end of life is a really valuable thing.
What you guys do is fantastic. Here in Ohio, everybody knows about the Cleveland Clinic and other hospitals from this area. We're well known for our medicine. my hospice care, and I'll shout out to Altman Hospitals, which is probably not as well known across the country, but it's still a major, very good hospital here in Ohio. Their hospice staff was absolutely fantastic. The people that came to the home, the people that came to the home right after death, they were just absolutely fantastic. And I would certainly hope that anybody listening to this does not need that type of care anytime soon. But these types of sticky situations are a reality of life. And if you do need it, embrace it and accept it and allow people to help you. Don't wait until, you're a mess. Everybody in your family's a mess. Part of staying strong for your loved one and being there for them is taking care of yourself. And hospice really does a good job of helping you as well as the person who's dying or gravely ill, whatever the situation may be. Would you say that's an accurate thing to say?
100%. Yes,
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Penny, thank you very much for coming on the program today. I really appreciate you talking about this. I was anticipating this episode. So thank you very much for coming on. And thank you for not being too sassy with me. You were very nice.
You stayed in line, so I didn't.
I stayed in line.
Well,
oh, yeah. I was very careful, too. Once again, my name is Billy Dees. You can find me on Twitter at Billy Dees, and you can tweet me anytime. I always say you have to be nice. You don't have to agree, but you have to be nice. Otherwise, I just ignore you. Thank you very much for listening to our podcast today. And until next time, have a great day, and we will talk to you again very soon. Well, hello everyone. I am Billy Dees from the self-titled Billy Dees Podcast. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and many more of the best podcast networks. Join me for my commentary and interviews. Follow me on Twitter, real easy to find, at Billy Dees. I am Billy Dees. I'd love to have you listen in.